So yeah, thank you very much everyone for joining us today. I am going to share my screen, otherwise you're just going to have to put up with my face and nobody really wants that. So hopefully you can now see the slide deck, and the BSL interpreter is still pinned underneath that. I can still see in my little preview screen, which is great. So yes, welcome. Thank you very much for attending this. How disability inclusive are you? It's myself, Adam Tweed. I'm the innovation consultant at AbilityNet, and I'm joined by Dr. Jennifer George from Goldsmiths, University of London. So we're short on time. We've got half an hour section, so I'm just going to crack straight on with it. I am going to be using a Slido for polls. I hope that doesn't upset anything. You will need to open this in a separate instance. We've just got a couple of polls within here. You can scan, there's a QR code on the screen at the moment. So if you have a smartphone with you and scan that code, it will take you directly to the Slido. But there's also, if you go to slido.com and put in the number 4131609, that should also give you, and that's a little separate poll that we're doing just around the gap analysis process. So, how do you know if your culture is inclusive? So hopefully anyone attending has some idea of who AbilityNet are, or are getting a feel for what we stand for. And our employee inclusion journey gap analysis is something that we've been developing over the past few years alongside our digital accessibility maturity model. And it's where the digital accessibility maturity model focuses on your digital content. The gap analysis focuses more on culture and the way in which technology can support this to enable us to create more inclusive environments. So, your overall culture feels a certain way, but how do you break this down into a manageable way to understand where the gaps are and what you might do next? Now, when designing and iterating products and services, designers use user journeys. It's a useful way of breaking down larger processes into smaller steps. And with cultural evaluation and change, it's really important to get into a position where things don't appear overwhelming and people simply disengage and say, I can't even get started on this. I'll wait for the people to start breaking down the door before I start dealing with the issues that I've got. So we have created an employee inclusion journey, and the slide on the screen currently shows a number of individual tiles, but at the top we have 5 tiles that go through the processes of recruitment, onboarding, ways of working, performance and career development, and then customer facing. And one of those, the ways of working tiles, is split into 3 more tiles: individual ways of working, teamwork and collaboration, meetings and events. So the important feature of the step-by-step process is that each stage can be consistent with the others. The subjects may change, but the template remains recognizable, making it very easy for those involved to see how things fit together. Even if organizations decide to cherry pick, as this is designed to do, the elements that are of most interest or of relevance to you, you're still going to get to know that overall structure. Now, within this journey, each element in the process, we wanted organizations to be able to benchmark themselves. After all, how can you identify a gap if you don't know where you're starting from? We decided using something like gold, silver and bronze presented the process with a kind of a fixed endpoint. You would go through the process, you get some level of certification or badge, and it was very much an end point. So we decided that we wanted to focus more on this as a journey, as a growth. So we've chosen the analogy of the growth from growth of a tree, so an oak tree to be specific, acorn to oak tree. So even at acorn stage, the potential for you as an organization is easily recognizable. I won't go into any more detail about the process, but please do let me know if you'd like to find out more. I'm happy to chat about what it involves or to send information out to you, whatever works best for you. But diving into one of the levels. So the first one that we, as I said, each process has a statement, and in a minute I'd like everyone to let us know which one of these statements you think best applies to your organization or your department. And the first one is the overall culture. So within the gap analysis process, so the employee inclusion journey gap analysis process, we have an overall feeling of where you are as an organization, and then each section has its own statements, and you'll pick a statement. So the first one is overall culture. And on this slide, we have a grid, levels 1 to 4, showing the growth from acorn through to seedling, to sapling, and then oak tree. So at acorn level, when you reflect on your culture, you may feel that disability is fairly invisible. The descriptor on the slide says, we don't really have any disabled staff or customers. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Then at seedling stage, the organisation has an appreciation that disabled people exist in the organisation and as customers, but the onus is on them to request and advocate for adjustments to working practices. And the quote says, we understand that disabled people may need adjustments, but rely on them to tell us what and why it's needed. Sapling stage is a great step forward. It's where the organisation has taken a strategic approach to anticipating and offering a range of adjustments to staff and customers. And the quote says, we've put a lot of thought into disability inclusion and provide a range of adjustments to staff and customers who tell us about their disability and accessibility needs. Then at oak tree stage, there's a realization that making adjustments to working practices and providing choice for customers benefits everyone. And the quote says, we recognize the positive impact on all staff of accessing flexible working, assistive tools, and alternative ways of working, and make them available regardless of disability. This means that people are not obliged to disclose a disability to work in the way that suits them best. Likewise, we create customer interactions and services with the broadest audience in mind. So level 4 is not the end. So the oak tree organisations continue to grow and react to the changing world around them. And the quote goes on to say, we're always listening and open to improving on this. So to our first Slido. Which stage do you think your organisation is at right now? So as I say, you can either scan the QR code. Oh, we've got a couple of people already, or join at slido.com, and the number's 4131609. Fantastic. Getting more people in. So at the moment, sapling seems to be leading, closely followed by seedling. Seedling dropping back now. Some person or some people are at oak tree level, which is fantastic. That's now increasing. Brilliant. So you can see there really is an overall mix of people out there at different stages within this journey, and the statements applying to different organisations in different ways. That's an overall feeling, and it's great to see. Obviously, we're very much at the moment preaching to the choir, so it's great to see that people are further along on that journey than some of the organisations that we have dealt with. Right. I want to now move to invite Dr. Jennifer George to speak to us about how she found the overall journey. So the fact that Goldsmiths are one of the lucky organisations to have carried out the employee inclusion journey. So just, Jennifer, if you don't mind, just tell us how you found the process. Was there anything that you found particularly good or helpful? Is there anything that was challenging or more challenging than you expected?
Yes, thank you, Adam. So I think just to establish the background a little bit, starting from before the pandemic, and then similar to many of us during the pandemic, and because of it, we kind of accelerated looking at student support and how we could make our information, learning and teaching more disability inclusive. So that journey started with students, but the kind of light bulb moment was there has been historically this assumption that all academic staff and professional services staff to some extent were assumed to somehow have a good understanding of what the different disabilities were, what they meant in practice, and why they should be making the changes they should be making in their practice. So this kind of led to the gap analysis, to try and understand institutionally where are these gaps, what's the gap in knowledge itself. So I found working with, so I'd led on some work within the department, with students and with staff, but working with AbilityNet, carrying out the gap analysis, having a report on all the 5 areas that Adam showed on the slides earlier on meant that it was easier to have conversations more widely. There was a written report, and it's not just me saying about, flagging things, what I'm spotting, but it's expert external organization that provided the report, having had conversations with several stakeholders about across the board, and then using that to have the conversations. And that's, I would say, was the most useful thing. The challenge was getting people on board for the gap analysis itself. But, that in itself was part of the findings, looking at why and how that could be pulled together.
So yeah, I mean, we talked about it as well. There were so part of the gap analysis is the kind of start off phase is a survey that goes out to identified staff members. So it's up to you whether it gets sent out to your entire organization or a targeted pool. And the kind of response rates on that were fairly low. Would have liked them to have been a bit higher, just to kind of get the proper data behind it, but there was still enough, and even the absence of that data, I think, was very telling in itself. I think there's a lot that can be said for how people are engaging with something, or equally not engaging. So in terms of where you scored in the overall journey, obviously you don't have to tell us, it's perfectly closed session, but were there any surprises for you? Was it nice or not so nice?
I'd say some of the prep work we did within our department, like checking templates and documents, we found that quite rewarding. Mm-hmm. So knowing where we were in relation to other departments or other teams across Goldsmiths. Personally, the level of awareness and perception of what the barriers might be was the surprise. So, for example, what some people or some teams thought, or some individual members of senior management or staff thought what the barriers might be were different to what were the barriers in practice.
Right.
And then there were some teams that thought they were fully accessible, but the discovery was that they were technically they had good awareness and practices in place for technical accessibility. But going beyond that, about the content, about the process, there were quite a few limitations there, and or the assumption that the accessibility checker didn't flag anything, so it's all good. Yeah. But how do you go get beyond that? What is it that we need to know? There's also, more broadly, that is not my area of responsibility. I'm doing this job because I'm an expert in the subject area, or my job is data processing, and this should be done by somebody else. So there was a little bit of that as well, but having this platform across all of these sessions to have those conversations was quite good. There's also, as academic members of staff, there's always a worry around, is this going to increase my workload? If there's a system change, what does that mean to me? So again, that was a interesting conversation to have. A pleasant surprise was the unity in realizing that some things were different across each of the departments, and also that unity in knowing that things have to change.
Right.
And for me, the pleasant surprise, the last one, was how much buy-in there has been since then, since we've had the report and the sessions. Fantastic. And how easy it is to have these conversations.
Yeah, fantastic. It was interesting what you were saying there about having identified groups that were almost seen as that's their job. Accessibility is the disability team or the accessibility team. And I think that kind of echoes what was said in one of the, oops, I've just set off one of my, that goes to what was said in one of the previous sessions about business in general and champion networks and ERG groups and that sort of thing, who become that kind of de facto, it's their problem. And we want to really move away from, they're a source of information, they're a source of expertise, not they're the people who you give your work to. But I do understand, you know, academia, people are stretched, and a lot of the kind of barriers that we face as accessibility professionals, talking to stressed academics, is that notion of this is going to be a lot more work for me. So that's really interesting. Thank you. And how about moving forward? What are you doing to move forward?
I think moving forward, I'm quite excited about the changes that are coming up. So since we've had the report, I've been invited to present to the senior management team about, you know, with the report and the findings and what work that needs to be done moving forward, both for staff and for students. I am working quite closely with our director of IT services and the director of our learning and teaching team, and incorporating that into the overall digital strategy. So we've identified areas that we need to work independently and which areas need to be rolled into our digital strategy. And overall, I think this has had the shift to let's have these conversations. It's okay if we can't fix all of them, but at least we'll recognize they're there. And I've been invited to several meetings, groups, committees in terms of, you know, can you present the findings to, you know, what is it that you're doing in your department? How can we all change things? So that's been helpful. As an institution, I'm seeing more of a shift. There's been quite, as EDI goes, we've had more conversations about gender and BAME, and I am beginning to see disability and conversations around disability also increasing at the moment. So I mean, I'm quite excited about that.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think things like senior buy-in is so crucial, because, you know, as senior as you are within a department, it's always going to be that next level that you need to get. So it's affecting our whole organization. So that it's fantastic that you've been able to move it forward that way. So moving on now, I'm just going to share my screen again, because I want to cover one of the sections that we go into, and that is individual ways of working. So this falls within the ways of working tile, and it was one of the three that were divided off. We felt that there was just too much to cover in this particular area. So again, I've got some statements on the slides. They are tiny on the screen, so I will be reading those out. But we've chosen this because it was one of the areas in which I think Jennifer found there were some quite interesting things that Goldsmiths did find in this particular area. So just as before, we'll do a quick poll after this. So I'm going to go through the statements and just ask you to pick the one that you think most closely matches where you think you are as an organization. So at Acorn stage, the statement reads, our ways of working are pretty fixed for everyone. We have standard working hours, equipment, systems, and processes. I don't know how accessible they are. Then at seedling stage, the statement reads, we know that employees may have specific needs or encounter barriers using systems and processes, but we react to those as and when someone highlights that they are struggling. People can make requests for flexible working or equipment, and this is approved if it doesn't cause too much disruption or cost. For sapling stage, we have a focus on disability inclusion within our individual working conditions. We provide flexibility and options around technology, working practices, and equipment that people disclosing a disability can choose from. We make sure that our technology is flexible for people to make adjustments and check our systems for accessibility. And then finally, at tree stage, we offer a full range of assistive tools, equipment, and flexible working options, which is available to everyone. We adopt tools based on their suitability for all users and have a process to introduce new systems and other digital tools that evaluates them for accessibility and usability. We invite regular feedback from team members about their working conditions to further improve accessibility and inclusivity. So hopefully you were able to pick one of those, and I'm just going to skip on to another Slido. So if those of you quick off the mark wouldn't mind voting, fantastic. 3 people, all 4 people now, all dead heat, and now sapling. It's like commenting on a race. Sapling as they reach the final fence. So again, a lot of people going for the sapling, so quite far along in the journey as we'd expect with an audience like this. Not so many on oak tree stage, so there's clearly some general work to be done around recognizing individual ways of working in order to reach that kind of final stage in our process of growth. So just wait for a couple more votes if there's any coming in. Fantastic. So yeah, sapling winning with 47%, and then seedling down at 37 is the next highest. So somewhere around that middle mark, but most of us shifting over towards the right. So, excuse me. Moving now back to Goldsmiths, and I said ways of working, you said was a section that you felt had highlighted some pretty interesting talking points for Goldsmiths. Can you just bring up a couple of those in the time we've got?
Yes. So I chose ways of working because as a head of department, I actually had more control over that area, how staff in my department were working. So the traditional practice was, we have a new member of staff, we just look at what's the office space available or desk space available and allocate. Mm-hmm. But having this gap analysis for this particular topic done meant it opened up an opportunity to talk about working space. And we had staff sharing lived experiences around, what their expectations were, or what would actually help them perform better, what kind of environment might actually increase their productivity, for example. So one of them was at the moment, for example, in a single occupancy office, but they mentioned that they'd benefit more if they were able to see other people, but knowing that it is a social context, but at the same time being able to block noise out, and that they could manage by headphones or move into a quiet space. And we'd never really thought about having a quiet space in the office area for that reason. We've thought of privacy in conversations, but we never really thought of respite or having kind of a calming environment. So that conversation was helpful. Something else that came up was members of staff with dyslexia, members of staff who've been in the organization for several years and hearing, and you do a disclosure when you start at the organization, but it's not a regular thing where you keep asking staff, is there anything new you want to disclose? So that provided staff an opportunity to look, I'm dyslexic and I've been struggling with this. Can we have a moderating system of assessments or the work I do, systematically, rather than me individually having that arrangement with someone? Yeah. What if there's somebody else who has the need but not as recognized as I do? And it's also helped our students with our staff speaking out more about their own lived experience. So we've kind of benefited in various ways.
Yeah, that was one thing that really did strike me, is that we've talked already today in the main keynotes about the importance of having visible people in those positions. So visible disability, people prepared to talk about disability, to take away the taboo and the stigma around it. Having senior people, that's something that becomes so normal within an organization to have a senior person with a lived experience of disability. So that's really fantastic. So I am conscious that we have 4 minutes. I am just having a quick look through to see if there are any questions or any comments. Nivea said, understanding of accessibility has improved since public sector accessibility guidelines in the pandemic in our organisation, which is a university. Is it the same for others? So is that something that you've experienced, Jennifer?
Yes, I mean, we had to do a huge amount of work. So just to give a bit of background, the 2018 change, I was in a different organization. So there I did a lot of work with putting in place or reducing the need for individual adjustments by, putting in place a lot of inclusion practices. Whereas, over the pandemic, we've had to, within 2 weeks, switch to digital assessments. And that was the largest piece of work. And if there's one positive takeaway from the pandemic, that is it accelerated the digital inclusion work that we've had to do. And I think as a computing department, we've been at an advantage. We managed to do a bit more. But yes, absolutely.
Fantastic. Yeah, Martin saying yes, the PS bar has definitely helped shift understanding of digital accessibility at Bristol. Being audited by CDDO also helped. So yes, I think that the public sector regulations are something that are being seen as slightly more toothy, if that's a term, than the previous kind of the equality. I know the Equalities Act wasn't really tested in terms of accessibility, and there were issues around what a reasonable adjustment was, and it seems that the public sector it's actually got some teeth behind it, so that's fantastic. Right, I'm just going to have a quick check through, but while I do that, I'm just going to share my screen again in terms of just giving you somebody to contact at AbilityNet if there are any questions or anything else that you'd like around, certainly around the gap analysis process. So we have Helen Wicks, our workplace relationship manager, and she's available on helen.wicks with an ES at abilitynet.org.uk. So apart from that, if there are no more questions in the chat, I just want to say thank you very much, Jennifer George, for joining us on this session and for leading me through it as well. And
thank you for having me.
And thanks to everybody for joining, for your interest in this. Please do get in touch, and thank you for your questions and your comments. So thank you very much, everyone.